Hello everyone, and thank you for joining us. Today we're going to be going over Inflow's ability to import transactions. Today we'll be covering the accounts payable items, withdrawals and deposits, as well as journal entries. At the end of the training session today, we'll go ahead and go over any questions that you may have. If at any point in time you have a question, please use the control panel to type your questions and either Kelsey or myself will answer. The first topic that we will cover today are the accounts payable imports. We can import multiple invoices for multiple HIDs, and also import your credit card statements directly to the AP process. To start, let's take a look at the ability to import multiple invoices. This is broken up into a three-step process of uploading, data mapping, and attaching any supporting documents. To start the process, we'll need to go into the import option. To do so, if we select Accounts Payable Invoice Entry, and then select the import option from the upper right action bar, this will take you to the import template options. From here, you can select any of the three accounts payable import options, which are the import multiple invoices, import invoices for multiple EHIDs, and finally the import credit card statement. For the first one, let's select the leftmost option for the import multiple invoices. And we'll go ahead and start with the first step, which is uploading the documents. Now for step one, you'll want to download the sample file, which is highlighted in blue. Doing so is going to take you to the invoice import template. Now this file is going to be broken up into multiple different categories to work with. The first being the vendor name, followed by the invoice number, the invoice date, accounting period, due date, any internal notes, and the customer number associated with the vendor. Following these lines, we're going to go into the chart of account splits, starting with the EHID, chart of account, the sub-vendor information if a sub-vendor is applied, the description of this chart of account split, and then the amount. Once we've put in each of these values, we can go ahead and see a more detailed view of what each field will look like and how we can enter in the information. Starting with the information, we'd start with putting in the invoice itself, as well as each additional row is going to be its own invoice. So row 2 would be for the first invoice, row 3 would be for the second, and row 4 would be for the third invoice. Any additional invoices can follow down in suit from rows 5 and on. Filling in the information, we'll go straight across the top, putting in the invoice number and the invoice details, as well as the chart of account splits that they're applied to. Now this document will allow up to 50 different chart of account splits. Once I've filled out the information, I'll save the document and return back to Inflow. The next step is going to be to upload the document, choosing the file, and then clicking on the upload option. This takes us on to step 2, which is the data mapping step. Now the data mapping stage allows me to make adjustments to any incorrect information, which will be highlighted in red. By clicking on the first field on the left, this will allow me to change the vendor information and bring up a list of all active vendors in the hotel. I'll go ahead and select AAA and the customer number associated. Now that I've put in AAA and the customer number associated, I'm going to correct the chart of account that was listed as well. Once I've applied a new chart of account, Inflow will notice that all columns have now been corrected, and I can hit next to move on to the last step, which is going to be adding any supporting documents. Now this step is an optional step. If you choose to go ahead and skip this overall, you can simply hit close or delete any of the rows that you've added into this process. Now to see where these invoices we've added have shown up, under accounts payable, if we go to invoice approval, you'll see the invoice that we have now imported in using the multiple invoice import. Next up, we'll take a look at the multiple EHID import. You can import invoices for any EHID that you have access to with this tool. You will follow the same 3-step processes of upload data, data mapping, and add supporting documents. The main difference with the file format is the ability to apply different HIDs to different invoices. You can select the import invoices for multiple EHID from the Invoice Entry Import tab. And you'll notice that it brings you up with a new header, but the three-step process is going to be the same. Now, next up, we have the option to import your credit card statement directly into Accounts Payable. To start with this process, this will be a four-step process with uploading your credit card statement, mapping the data, creating and mapping the rules, and finally the vendor details. The first step is going to be selecting the Import Credit Card Statement from the Invoice Entry Import options, and then uploading your credit card statement in an Excel file, either XLSX or CSV format. Once you upload your document, you'll want to select the mapping rule, which you can choose from an existing or create a new rule on the spot. At this point now, I've uploaded the statement, and I can proceed on to the second step, which is the data mapping. From here, we need to match each column from the Excel file to the inflow fields. When this step has been complete, you'll have the information column headings matching the inflow fields and be able to move on to the third step, which is the rule mapping. Now, rule mapping is where we can set up the automated processes for future invoices. We can create multiple rule mappings for both the company and category columns. And again, once these rules are created, anytime you use this credit card rule, any company or category rules created will automatically be applied to all rows. So starting with the company rules, you'll notice that this is broken up into three different fields. If the company contains a certain vendor, in this case we'll use Cisco, then the chart of account needs to be assigned as well, and any sub-vendors would also need to be applied. Once you've filled out each of the three rows, you can save the information as well as multiple other rules created. Again, this will list for you the vendor name, respective chart of account, and any sub-vendors that you wish to apply. Now, as you save the information for the rules, you'll notice that some of the red fields have now been cleared out, and any of the vendors that had Cisco or any for the other rules created are now going to have details automatically filled in. There are still some fields with red, but that's okay. We'll cover that in the next step, which is going to be the vendor details. Once all the rules have been created, we can move on to this final step, which is the vendor details. From here, we'll correct any of the remaining red fields, as well as add the actual vendor details. So the first thing I'll do is enter in the vendor details and remove those fields that do not apply to this import. Those could be for any of the statement items that are not related to the business, if you're using both a personal and business card together. Once we've cleared out any of the additional rows that are not for this import, we can also enter in the vendor details themselves, such as the vendor name, customer number, accounting period, the invoice number, date, and due date. Once all of the fields have been filled out, there's one final optional step, which is the ability to delete any of the additional columns that are still listed. So before, you have the option to correct any of the fields remaining by selecting New Chart of Accounts or simply checking the box next to each of the rows to delete those transactions. Once all of the details have been filled out, simply choose the Save and Close option. And under Invoice Approval, your American Express bill will now be posted, ready to have the transaction either processed as a check or ACH. Next, we'll move on to the importing of withdrawals and deposits. To access the import option for either the withdrawals or deposits, navigate to Cash Management and select the proper bank account that you wish to create the transaction for. You can now either select either the withdrawal or deposit option, depending on the transaction you're creating. And now you'll be able to select the Import Multiple Withdrawals or Deposits option from the upper menu bar. At this point, we'll follow the exact same three-step process as before from the invoice page. You'll download the file, fill out the document, and save and upload. confirm that the mapping is correct and that any of the red fields have been corrected, upload any of the supporting documents, and your withdrawal will show up directly under the bank account. The same process will be followed for the deposits. Lastly, let's take a look at the journal entries. The journal entries can be imported in two different ways. The first, which follows the exact same format as other imports, where you can import multiple entries at once for multiple chart of accounts. And the second option is for the single journal entry process. To start though, we'll take a look at the multiple journal entry import, which again follows an upload, data mapping, and upload document step. The next option is going to be with a single journal entry, which has a separate format file from all of the other import tools. This is best used for entries such as your month's end, payroll accruals, and closing statements. Now, the main difference again in the process for the configuration of the file, rather than each row being a different entry, each row represents a different chart of account split. This allows you to add up all of your entries as you go. This format also allows you the ability to copy and paste your data from other Excel files that you may have, making the application of journal entries easier. The information is going to be broken up into multiple different categories, starting with the vendor name, date, accounting period, internal notes, and then the property that this is applied to. Then going into the actual chart of account splits with the chart of account number, description for each, and then the total amounts. Now the information in columns A through E only needs to be entered in on the first row or on row 2, as this is only a single entry and the information does not need to be duplicated for each additional row. Next, you can apply for each of the different chart of account splits in their offsetting values, such as your property insurance and prepaid value, workers' comp, health insurance, and payroll bonuses. Once you've set up each of your different journal entry and offsets, the document will be saved, and you'll simply use the upload tool to save it into Inflow. Now at this point, I'd like to open up for any questions. If you do not happen to have any questions at this time, I want to thank you very much for joining us today, and I hope you have a wonderful weekend. And I don't have any questions coming through at the moment. Hank, what's the question that you have? I'm going to go ahead and unmute you real quick. Go ahead, Hank.
Hi, it's Sachi here.
Oh, how are you doing?
I had a question about I'm good, how are you?
Good. How can I help you?
I had a question about multiple uploading invoice. So what's it actually for? I mean, I have been doing the invoices pretty long, but I just have done the invoice entry. So what is multiple uploading for?
So the option for multiple invoice upload is in the situation for either multiple hotels if you have 5 or 6 invoices at once. Rather than having to follow through the key process of uploading the invoice, you can use the Excel file to put in all of the information and then simply upload them all at once. At that point, you can attach the additional invoice details to each row. But what it'll do is create each of those invoices based on each row at once. So rather than having to go through the process 5 or 6 times, everything will be pulled in at once.
Okay. Awesome. That's all.
It can also be very useful for any of your end of the month transactions that you may have, including your franchise fees bill that comes through, which is always going to be the same chart of accounts, but can be for a large number, such as 20 to 30 different chart of accounts. So you can create this import file and save it as a template for further uses, where simply going through and updating the values for each of those chart of accounts and then saving it into the accounting will allow you to import that transaction much quicker than having to go through and key in each separate chart of account split.
Okay. Okay. I got that.
Okay.
Thank you.
You're very welcome.
Yes. Okay.
Now, it does not look like I have any other questions. If at any time you do find yourself having any questions about the import options, please submit a support ticket through Inflow. And also, if you wish to see any of our recordings, please simply navigate to the help option in the bottom right corner, select the user guide, and click on the webinar import option, and that will list for you all of the webinars that have already been attended. Again, thank you everybody very much for joining us today, and have a wonderful weekend.